Okay, so I would like to welcome all of you to our annual community series presentation. This year, in cooperation with the Center for Applied Economics, we have the U.S. economy. We have the theme of the U.S. economy, present and the future. Our presenters today are the following, and these are the titles they're going to present. So Professor Bergman is going to talk about the Fed. Then we have Professor Dansky, who is going to address technology issues. Professor Davis will look at climate change. Professor Morris, we're waiting on him, and if he's unable to because of conflict of schedule, then I might be able to present what his to go through some of his presentations. He's looking at inflation, and then we have Professor Ray in unemployment and inflation. The order is alphabetical, and that's what we have done in the past. If you would like to go to meet directly with the professor in question, or if you have questions at the end, or if you would like to reach out to them because of you have questions in their presentation, here is how you can reach each one of them. Each one of them is a faculty here at the college, and we have I have the link, how their webpage and their emails. So this is Professor Bergman, Professor Dansky, email and web link, Professor Davis, email and web link, Professor Morris, Professor Morris, email and web link, and Professor Ray, email and web link. Our first presenter is Professor Lee Bergman, who is going to address how the Fed can fix the economy. So I would like to welcome him. And at the end, we're going to have a question and answer session. Thanks and welcome to the panel. So Professor Bergman.
Okay, let me share screen here and open the PowerPoint. And from the start. Okay, what I'm going to talk about is the Federal Reserve. And the question is, can the Federal Reserve save the economy? It's kind of an ironic question. Because it's not the job of the Fed to, quote, save the economy. It's to deal effectively with financial issues, large scale. So let's take a look at what is the Fed, what does it do, what are its powers, and what powers doesn't it have? So I say the Fed is the author of our dollar currency. I was struggling to find an appropriate word for what they are. They're not the supervisor. They don't create the currency. They don't really manage the currency. They do quite a few things, but it doesn't suggest they have any ultimate or overwhelming power. They're often seen as very powerful, but there are limits to what they can do. So if you look here, it'll say Federal Reserve Note. And Federal Reserve Note just means the Federal Reserve issues it. It's actually printed by the Treasury. It's paper money. Most of our money is not paper money. It's money that's in the form of entries on bank balance sheets. What does that mean? If you have $1,000 in a bank, they owe you $1,000. It's literally an IOU. So that's what the bank owes you. From your standpoint, that's a benefit. From their standpoint, it's a liability. Let's take a look at that $100 bill. What is that? That's actually an IOU. It says that the Federal Reserve or the Treasury, depending upon how you might interpret it, owes you $100. So if you go to the Fed in Atlanta, what will they do? Well, they'll probably say you can't come in, but let's try a bank instead. They say, I have an IOU here. I'd like to cash it in. They'd say, thank you, Mr. Bergman. Would you like 250s, 520s, or 100 ones, or maybe a lot of pennies? So you're not really going to get gold or silver as used to be the case. So these bank deposits, which constitute the majority of money in our system, are guaranteed by the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, up to $250,000 per account. And this is what really stands behind bank deposits and makes bank deposits something that we're comfortable with. So the national banks are supervised by the Fed. And I went and started looking at all the agencies that deal with this. I was up to 16 agencies. There may be a bit of overlap, but there's a lot of regulation going on here in addition to the Fed. Now, interesting point, and a point that you may see as being fantastic, I certainly do. Most money creation is a consequence of bank lending. In other words, the Fed didn't manufacture most of the money. Well, I can say, ironically, maybe they're trying to do that now. But that really, most of the money comes from bank lending, the money creation. So more about the Fed responsibilities. They conduct monetary policy. They cannot set interest rates. They can influence interest rates. And I'd say the chief job responsibilities secure the financial health and stability of the economy. They buy, sell treasuries, corporate bonds, and so on. So what are they supposed to be doing? They're supposed to promote maximum employment and stable prices. They supervise and regulate financial entities. They set capital and liquidity requirements for banks and other financial institutions, and some non-bank institutions as well. They provide liquidity to the financial system. What does liquidity mean? It means ready money that financial institutions have to resolve the demands that they might have on them. If you go into a bank and you want $1,000 and they don't have the money, that's a lack of liquidity. This is rather unlikely to happen, but in a larger scale, it can be an issue. And what they try to do is prevent what's called a domino or cascading effect, where if a major institution fails, that it brings down the others like a domino or a house of cards. One of the very important things the Fed does is operate the interbank payment system. It used to be that checks were flown overnight, not so much anymore. It's done electronically, and the Fed actually settles at the end of the day, or perhaps during the day, payments amongst financial institutions. Interestingly enough, the US dollar is the world reserve currency used to finance 70% of world trade. So if Indonesia wants to buy something from Mexico, they'll do it in US dollars, not Indonesian currency or Mexican currency. US currency is used for international trade. It creates something called the euro dollar market. It's not European. It is a dollar market. It's as big as everything that goes on in the US. It's pretty much outside the control and purview of the Fed. So the Fed does not have complete control even of the world system, not even complete control of the US system, not at all of the world system. So what's going on here? What is it that we would like to see the Fed solve? Well, COVID-19 produced a lot of unfortunate and bad results. The economy is in disarray. About 200,000 businesses have closed. That's above normal levels. Congress appropriated $6 trillion, $867 million directly to taxpayers. The unemployment problems are persisting, more business failures, and especially supply chain disruptions. You almost undoubtedly have gone to Publix or somewhere else and it's not in stock, or it's going to take months to get it. 4.5 million US workers are missing. We have fewer workers. There's an employee shortage. Why is all of this happening? And it's a problem of short shipments from Asia, backups at ports, shortage of truck drivers. and a shortage of microprocessors, which is causing a shortage of vehicles. So what can the Fed do to solve these problems? Well, not too much, really. There's something called the real economy, which is what produces things. There's a financial economy, which is kind of the grease or the oil that makes production transactions feasible. It helps make transactions go. In fact, it's necessary for transactions. All of that is working okay. But what can the Fed do about the real economy when goods aren't shipped? Not a lot. What can the Fed do about inflation? We will talk about that. So what tools do the Fed have? They can choose lower interest rates. Well, interest rates from the Fed standpoint are close to zero. That's already done. They can bail out financial institutions in trouble. They're still doing that. They're still making loans directly. That's being done already. They can create money. I'm advised not to say print money because it's not literally printed, but they are creating money. They're making direct loans to financial institutions and to businesses. They can change regulations to make borrowing more available to help marginal borrowers. They're not doing very much of that. That's a lingering concern. And perhaps because they look back on the Great Recession, where that was done to excess, they can support fiscal policy. That is where government is creating stimuluses. They can help by buying some treasury bonds, and they have provided direct assistance to state and local governments. They can encourage bank to lend for production rather than stock buybacks and asset purchases. That has not been very successful. Why not? Well, because the first is easy to do and relatively easy to make money, whereas if you lend money for a factory, that's a longer term prospect and it's much more risky. So what is some of the problems the Fed's dealing with? One of them is inflation. And I'm showing prices here. I will warn you or advise you that I don't think there are prices in Florida yet. Those were prices taken from California. I expect if you look at current California prices, they may be in the $5 area. But prices for gasoline and many things have gone up a lot. The consumer price index most recently hit 6.2%, with core inflation of 4.6%. That's the biggest inflation binge in 31 years. Is inflation out of control? Well, the Fed shoots for 2%. 6.2% is a lot more. And there's been talk that 4% might be the norm for the next 3 or 4 years. That is a lot. Have you seen gas prices skyrocket? Is this permanent? What can the Fed do? Probably almost nothing. This is partly the consequence of too much government spending and supply problem disruptions. Also, there is always a volatility about gasoline and oil. There was a hurricane that shut down production in the Gulf. All of this contributed to the problem. Nothing the Fed can do about that. But a lot of this has nothing to do with the Fed. It has to do with government policy. Now, unfortunately, this administration is discouraging domestic production because they're worried about green policy. In other words, they would like to downplay oil and gas because of the carbon dioxide. So President Biden shut down drilling leases on federal lands first day in office, and state and federal policies also have blocked new pipeline construction. That's long-term negative. So I don't see that the Fed has any real tools they would be willing to use. One tool common is higher interest rates that would tend to depress or suppress the economy, which already looks like it's not terribly healthy. even with $6 trillion of stimulus payments. They weren't all stimulus, but certainly were payments to the economy. So question, has the Fed painted itself into a corner? I might say the Fed has been painted into a corner. The Fed has little control of the real economy, has no control whatsoever over what the administration does. So the Fed is reactionary. It's reactionary with very few tools to use. So existing in new spending is in trillions of dollars. What can the Fed do? They borrowed some, they've purchased some treasury securities. If they purchase too many of them, it's equivalent to creating money, quote, out of thin air. The Fed isn't the real economy or even the financial economy. It is a manager. It's a manager with limited capability, even though it's often talked about as if they control everything. The Fed is a central bank constrained by its charter. So, economics to the rescue. Kind of doubtful, but I'll try it. You might try to incentivize banks to lend for productive uses. Love to see that. That would be a major shift for the Fed, and it would take quite a bit of effort to move in that direction. Let interest rates find their own equilibrium. Interest rates would go way up, and that would be a problem for the Fed. And the other, I say, don't spend trillions haphazardly you don't have. Oh, well, that's politics. That is also out of the control of the Fed. So the Fed basically can give money or lend money to institutions or businesses in serious trouble. If they're authorized to do so by legislation, that can help. Interest already almost zero, not too much that the Fed has in its toolbox. Then there's the ballooning national debt. Okay, it's 28.93 trillion, of which 22.93 trillion is held outside the government. About 6 trillion of that is held by Social Security and so on to fund the future. I would like to be able to write a check to myself for $500,000 and say that's going to fund my future. That's not too workable. That's kind of curious. So much of it, internal federal debt, is held to fund Medicare and Social Security. The Fed is boxed in, basically. At a 5% interest rate, if interest rates went up to that level, interest rate payment on the debt would consume 22% of the federal budget. That would be totally devastating. When I say the Fed is boxed in, what I mean is they can't let interest rates go up. Okay, so the Fed is constrained from increasing interest rates, since this would potentially slow the economy and require interest rate payments needed for ordinary government needs. Okay, what is the answer? I'm afraid the answer is inflation and more inflation. Inflation is a way to get us out of this predicament. It is a terrible way, but there don't seem to be many alternatives to inflation. I'm not trying to explain why inflation would be helpful. Inflation could be totally devastating, and it's especially devastating to the lower and middle class. So, well, at least inflation might solve the debt problem, say tuned. That's a really bad way to do it, but we are perhaps headed in that direction. So this is something that's interesting to look at. You can get this online, and this shows where the economy is at any point, the US national debt, budget items, and everything else. If you look at this and it doesn't give you an extreme headache and cause you total panic, it's because you're not looking at it very carefully. There's certainly great concerns here, and where we'll go from here, I really could not predict. Sam, back to you.
Thanks very much, Professor Bergman. Thanks very much. Now we have Professor Dansky. So Professor Dansky is going to educate us on technology and artificial intelligence. Thanks. Oh, you're muted.
Can't hear you, Steve.
Okay. Thanks for joining today. We greatly appreciate it. Thanksgiving is next week, and I want to promise you that my presentation will not be a turkey, but I will be giving you some information that you will be able to gobble down. We're going to look into the future today, but the track record for predicting the future isn't so great. Even the best minds don't get it right. I'm not going to read all of these here, but I think some of them are I think you'll resonate with. You had the former chairman of IBM say that I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers, or Ken Olsen, who used to own also one of the very large computer companies, saying that there's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. Or another, Bill Gates, head of Microsoft, saying 640,000 of memory ought to be enough for anybody. And clearly, all these predictions were off target. And as Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player and baseball manager of the Yankees, said, predictions are difficult, especially if they involve the future. So I'm not going to make any predictions today. Sorry, folks. But I will identify and discuss a couple of key technology issues that should have a major impact on the future of the U.S. economy. In particular, I want to be focusing on jobs. For those of you in my macroeconomics class, we recently had a podcast where we talked about structural unemployment. And I think you're going to see that woven through what I'm going to discuss. And for those of you who are in my microeconomics class, think back to that earlier podcast we did on the history of light. So with that, there's so many topics that we could talk about today that have to do with what is going to affect our future. We could spend a whole week talking about all this. I'm just going to focus on these two due to time constraints: artificial intelligence and electric vehicles. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is of a CVS receipt. I put that there because I know so many of you are, can relate to this, that you go into CVS, you purchase something, and they print out a really long list of coupons. And the question is, how did they know which coupons to give to you? And the answer is artificial intelligence. They've been collecting data on you and your previous purchases. It's a lot of data. They start connecting the dots, and they're able to predict what your likely purchases are going to be. But more important, how much should that coupon be to tip the scale for you to purchase something? So today, in addition to CVS, what we see is that 29% of all companies in this country already are using artificial intelligence to some degree. We see that 17% of the Fortune 500 companies are already using it at scale, meaning across their entire enterprise. And so when we think about what does it do, Well, it's already being used to predict things, like CVS is predicting your future purchasing habits. It's doing machine learning. Part of it is, how do we predict when a particular machine on an assembly line is going to fail? It's doing things like voice recognition, like hello Siri. It's every time you go and you ask a question on a website where they say, "How can I help you? Do you want to ask me a question?" and you type something in, you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a computer that has been trained through artificial intelligence how to respond to you. One of the things that I know you're familiar with is HonorLock. HonorLock has artificial intelligence algorithms to predict when someone is doing something that they shouldn't be doing while taking a test. A survey of Fortune 500 companies is showing that they're going to be making major investments over the next 3 years into artificial intelligence. And those investments are going to be both in terms of talent and also the infrastructure within their company. What we're seeing already is a job market. And if any of you are potentially even remotely interested in computer science, the salaries that are being dangled in front of young graduates to go into artificial intelligence right now is among the highest of any college major out there right now. And here at IRSC, just as a little advertising plug, we have courses here that will get you on the way, within that computer science and information technology majors. I just skipped. Here we go. Here's the future of AI. First, right now, we see it happening mostly with large companies because it's expensive. But the price of AI is going to come down. We're going to find it's going to be easier for small businesses to use. And so we're going to find, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, that small businesses are going to be adopting artificial intelligence in the way they run their businesses. Just as an example, look what happened to personal computers in the 80s and the 90s. It used to be very expensive. And in the 80s and 90s, you saw the use of computing go from only being in the realm of large corporations to now where every corporation, every business has a computer. Okay. What we're going to see in the future is that AI is going to improve the ability of a seller to get the customer to open their wallet. Okay. Not just the way CVS is doing it, but it's going to be able to get to questions like, what does a business really know about their customers? But more importantly, who are the people that aren't their customers? And why not? And what do they need to do to make them their customers? This is going to totally change how we market. For those of you in micro who have studied now what elasticity is, and we looked at the slope of the curve, well, this is going to allow businesses not to look at elasticity on a market level, but on the individual level. So those coupons that you get will be precisely tailored to what they are able to determine about your spending habits, your income, your use of credit cards, your debt, and taking account all the things that you purchase, your income, and then figure out what size coupon to give to you so that you will now make a purchase. In other words, they're going to be able to figure out your elasticity at the individual level. Now, we're also going to see more use of AI in medical diagnosis, that is going to be able to help doctors. And the two pictures in the upper right-hand corner here are pictures of X-rays and CAT scans, and doctors look at a lot of X-rays. They look at a lot of data, and the artificial intelligence is going to help them look at that data without any biases that they may bring to the table about their knowledge of a patient's history that may be making them blind to a certain diagnosis. It's going to help predict machinery failure in advance. That means that businesses will be able to not have expensive failures of machinery, that they'll be able to fix things before they break. And it's going to help us in the fight with global warming, because the analytics will help us actually find where releases of CO2 and methane are emitting from, and use that to try to predict where it's going to happen later. I think on a somewhat scary note, artificial intelligence is going to be used in warfare. General McChrystal, who was leading our troops in Afghanistan, said that, quote, the increasingly sped up pace of warfare will require us to adopt artificial intelligence to help make our decisions in the way that we respond to attacks in warfare. Now, let's talk more directly about jobs. We're talking about using autonomous driving in long-haul trucking. And that's going to be done by artificial intelligence. Today, we have more than 2 million drivers of big trucks and tractor trailers in this country. What's going to happen to them when artificial intelligence now is driving these trucks? Now, also think about the cascading events, because if these trucks don't have drivers in them, what's going to happen to the restaurants? What's going to happen to the hotels that are all located along the interstate highways? That's a lot of people that are going to need to somehow transition. This is a classic example of structural unemployment. And it's something that this country is going to need to address in one way or another for the future. Now, the artificial intelligence on the trucks is a good segue to talk about electric cars, which is the other topic here. The largest use of energy in our economy is for electricity production. And the second largest is the fossil fuels used for transportation. So, for example, when you look at this chart, and this chart's a couple of years old, but it's still, the data is pretty close to what it is today. We see that natural gas is the largest fuel for electric generation, then coal, and then we see some nuclear, some solar, hydro, all feeding into this box over here that says electric generation. So we're producing about 37 quads of energy. That's a lot of BTUs with a lot of zeros after it that we use for electricity. And that electricity, as you see, goes out there to be used in homes, in businesses, and then for industrial purposes. But if you go to the bottom here in green, we see petroleum. Now, petroleum is used for a couple purposes. One of them is for industrial purposes, like making plastics, making cosmetics. But the primary use of petroleum, 25.9 quads of energy, is going for transportation. In other words, it's the stuff that you pump into your gas tank every week. Now, if we switch over from combustion engine cars that are using petroleum, and we switch over to electric vehicles, that means that most of that area in green is going to be gone, and it's going to get added to by some type of electric generation, whether it be natural gas, solar, wind, whatever, and that's the big question, that will have to make up that huge difference, and it is a huge difference. In other words, if we switch our economy from gasoline to electric, how many additional power plants will we need to build? Somewhere between 75% and 100%. I calculate 75%. Elon Musk publicly said it'll be about 100%. We're in the same ballpark. That's a lot of power plants. Just to kind of put this in perspective of how many power plants there are, that I was going to have to get redone. We're talking somewhere in the range of around 850,000 megawatts of additional electric capacity. Okay, many of you have driven by that array of solar panels on I-95 that Florida Power put in. And that's about 74.5 megawatts. In other words, we're going to need about 10,000 more of those just to meet the change of going from combustion engines to electric vehicles. Now, if we're also talking about switching over our existing power plants that are coal and natural gas, keep in mind that 63% of our existing electric capacity is powered by natural gas and coal. And so that's going to add an almost doubling of that number that we just talked about that would be required to provide electricity for electric vehicles. So in other words, instead of talking about 10,000 more of those solar power plants like the one along I-95, we're talking 20,000 of them. Okay. Now, there'll be a number of environmental effects to consider. And Professor Davis is going to be touching on the need for environmental changes in our behavior. But think about how much land all these solar panels will take up. Think about if we go with wind, all the effects of the wind. If we continue with and keep our existing electric generation, we have those effects. And we have this issue of batteries. These electric vehicles, they all have big honking batteries in them. And the question is, what do we do with those? And its potential environmental effects. But from the standpoint of jobs, what happens to the over 900,000 people who today either own or work at gas stations? What happens to the 130,000 people who drill for oil? And how about the other 175,000 people who work at refineries? You see, without the combustion engine, the oil industry is going to be decimated. You know, the electric vehicle, the combustion vehicle created the oil industry. And when you get rid of the combustion engine, it's going to say bye-bye petrochemicals. So you also have this issue of parts, because electric vehicles don't have a coolant system. They don't have a transmission. There's a lot of parts that they just don't use the way a combustion engine car does. And the United States Auto Parts Association says they think they're going to lose about 30% of all the workers who now make parts for cars, or about another 300,000 jobs. Okay, so this transition is going to do to the combustion engine what the combustion engine did to the horse. In other words, it's going to create a lot of new jobs, but these jobs are not going to look like the ones that were lost, and the skill sets are not going to be able to be directly transferred. So we have an issue facing our country as to how are we going to handle this? This isn't something that's going to happen far in the future. The estimate is about 2 decades. That's it for a complete transition from combustion engines to electric engines. GM and Ford have already put out their schedule. Other auto manufacturers have also put out and announced their schedules for this transition. And they all expect to be 100% electric in their production lines within 10 years. And the reasons they're doing it have nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with the cost of making a car. It has to do with the fact that there are fewer parts. It has to do that they're going to be easier to assemble, that there'll be a smaller supply chain. Okay, these are all things that once this genie gets out of the bottle, all of the manufacturers are going to have to do it to compete. And so it looks like 10 years from now, you won't have any choice but to buy an electric car. And it'll take another 10 years, because that's the average lifetime that a car lasts on the road. And so within 2 decades, we're just not going to see combustion engine cars around anymore. So this has a major implication for the type of jobs that we're going to have here in the future. So let me just say in conclusion, I think it's important that we look at the various forces that will likely shape our future so that we can prepare. But we all know that something that we're just not seeing coming is going to be transformational and just come around and just bite us. So we do the best thinking we can, we prepare the best we can, but we have to remain flexible. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Professor Dansky. Thanks. Professor Davis, if you can please share your screen. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. It was great listening to Professor Dansky, because climate change will actually come into the picture. It will actually be linked perfectly. So the title of my presentation is Climate Change, Urgent Action Required. As you can see in this picture, there's iceberg floating near Ilusat, Greenland. I definitely would not want an iceberg for a neighbor. So let's start by trying to answer some questions. What is climate change, and why does climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. And climate change, because of 2 things. Number 1, because of natural process. And number 2 is because of human activities like burning fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, and gas. And burning fossil fuels generates what we call greenhouse gas emissions that trap the sun's heat and raises temperature. Sources of greenhouse gas emission. This is an This is an overview, and basically comes from carbon dioxide and methane. So carbon dioxide is about 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. And out of this 80%, 42% comes from the consumption of electricity and coal for heating, and 33% comes from the use of oil for transportation, 19% from combustion, 6% from cement production. While methane here, which is 10%, comes from landfills, deforestation, livestock, and agricultural practices. What are the results of greenhouse gas concentration? Well, the Earth is now 1.1 degrees Celsius, or 33.98 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was in the 1800s. And scientists claim that to avoid this, to avoid 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is actually catastrophic, some action has to be done. The last decade was the warmest on record, and the World Health Organization estimated that more than 140,000 people per year have already died as a result of climate change in Africa and Southeast Asia. And after 2030, there will be an additional 250,000 deaths per year estimated. This table shows us cumulative carbon dioxide emissions by geographic location. As you can see here, from 1850 to 1990, emissions came basically from Europe, which comprised in this classification about 50 countries, and the US. The US alone has about over 30% emissions. And as this has changed from 1850 to 2017, Europe and the US actually has dropped carbon dioxide emissions, but there has been an increase in rest of the world. What a cute puppy, Steve, sorry. Okay, China and India. Who emits the most carbon dioxide? Basically, there are three countries. Number one is China, which contributes 27% global emissions, followed by the US, 15% global emissions, and India, which is about 6.8% emissions. This is from the Hamilton Project of the Brookings Institute. So we have here, again, greatest emissions are coming from China, the US, and India. And it's noteworthy that in Asia alone, emissions total about 53% globally. If we put climate change in the framework of economic analysis, we can consider greenhouse emissions, which causes global climate change or global warming as a cause of environmental externalities, which we learned from micro, and a case of overuse of common property resource. Climate change has affected climate patterns from melting polar ice to rising sea levels. If you recall, common property resource is a resource which is available to everyone, which makes it non-excludable. The use of the resource may diminish the quantity and quality available to others, which makes it a rival. So the atmosphere is actually a global commons in which individuals and firms can release pollution. What are the risks of climate change? There are two major risks of climate change. First, we call them physical risks, which are sourced from gradual global warming and increased frequency of extreme weather events. And the second, which you will recognize later on, as Professor Dansky has discussed, is what we call transition risk. And it's, again, noteworthy that it's not easy to change because climate change is systemic. Both the risk, both physical and transition risk, will represent major, as in huge, structural changes that will require transition and innovation in various sectors of the economy. What are the macroeconomic risks of climate change? Climate change risks manifest themselves as economic shocks. We learned economic shocks from macroeconomics. They're unpredictable events that produce a significant change within an economy. So physical risk can actually affect consumption, investment, and trade by providing negative demand shocks. For example, the shift to electric cars, which was mentioned earlier, will affect our consumption of gas. However, it doesn't stop there. There are what we call transition risks, which means that if we transition to a low carbon economy, this will affect the energy sector, the car manufacturing sector, and of course, the infrastructure that will support this industry. Now let's look at the supply side shock. Supply side shocks affect the productive capacity of the economy, which means that the physical risk will actually affect labor supply, energy, food, and other inputs, capital stock, and technology. Supply side shocks will also affect transition to a low carbon economy and clean energy. It's easy to say clean energy, but however, infrastructure has to be redirected to projects that are low carbon producing. For example, as we shift to energy efficient buildings, capital stock and technology will be reallocated to renewable energy. This table shows you the weather and climate disasters in the US for the last 20 years. So all disasters, we have a total of 226, and the total cost is about 1.6 trillion. The biggest disasters came from tropical cyclones, followed by severe storm, of which there were 120, and drought, there were 18, with a total cost of about 146 billion. For this year alone, there has been 18 disasters with a total cost of about 104 billion. And again, the biggest disasters were from tropical cyclone, followed by winter storms and severe storm. This map shows you the 18 disasters, climate disasters that happened this year. We had a drought, wildfire, we have flooding, we had winter storm, cold wave, severe weather, hailstorms, hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, you name it, we got it. And this is just, and the year is not yet over. What is the impact of climate change in the US and global GDP? You remember from our textbook that GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced annually within the borders of a country. And global GDP is the combined GDP of all countries of the world. I included here the top 6 GDP by countries in US trillion. This is provided by the World Bank. This shows you that these countries are the US, followed by China, Japan, Germany, UK, and India. Please note that the 3 biggest carbon dioxide emitters, US, China, and India, are among the top 6 highest GDP in the world. This table shows us how bad is it actually. So it shows you global temperatures rise in 4 scenarios and impact on GDP by 2050. This was prepared by Swiss Re Institute, which is actually one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. So we have here the best scenario is if we will try to be good and produce well below 2 degrees Celsius of CO2 emissions, which is the ideal, well, not really ideal, but the best scenario because the damage has already been done. World GDP will actually go down by 4.2%. Middle East and Africa, the biggest effect, 4.7 degrees. Asia, 5.5 degrees. Asia is divided into richer countries, advanced Asia, and ASEAN, which are actually Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So the worst scenario, the most severe scenario is 3.2 degrees centigrade increase. This is difficult to imagine because 3.2 degrees Celsius increase is about 37.76 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're talking about 90 degrees, which is already unbearable, this is plus about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a severe case. And the bad news is world GDP will still go down by, of course, obviously, this is the biggest number. It's 18%. The greatest effect will be on Middle East and Africa at 27.6%. And of course, Asia at 26.5%. So the bad news hasn't stopped. We have here, what does climate change mean for Florida? So there will be higher temperatures, which can affect the health of children, elderly, and the sick. Higher temperature and humidity can cause heat stroke, dehydration, asthma, and other health problems. Freezing problems will affect agriculture, especially citrus fruits and other fruits and vegetables grown during the winter. Hotter temperature will reduce yields of corn, sugar, peanuts, cotton. There'll be damage to coral, fish, and other marine species. There's going to be a 25% increase in demand for water. There will be rising sea level. There will be increased salinity of water, more expensive wind damage insurance, and of course, flood insurance. There will be increased land flooding. The future, COP26, the recently concluded Conference of the Parties, where there were 200 member countries trying to come up with solutions to fix our climate. The goal is to secure global net zero, which is net zero carbon dioxide emissions, and to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And the Glasgow Climate Act is actually the final result of the long meeting, which was almost 10 days. This was endorsed by about 200 countries. Instead of phase out fossil fuels, now they're using the language phase down fossil fuels. And there has been pledges to reduce emissions, to restore economic systems, and to switch to clean energy, and to address historic injustices around climate change. Future directions of research. What are economists doing to address climate change? Economists are trying to do a lot of things, obviously, but I'll mention a few. And number one is education. Economists are currently and actively involved in educating the public on the damages of climate change. And I believe that schools will continue to be incubators of innovation. Just like in the internet revolution, schools were incubators of innovation. Another thing that economists are doing are estimating climate change damages and defining policy guidelines on reducing carbon dioxide emissions. So, for example, they're trying to determine how insurers can actually come up with a fair price for fire insurance in California. And they're developing models that will better analyze climate change and monetary policy interactions. For example, they're exploring how negative supply shocks can affect forecasting of inflation. Conclusion. Climate change is a systemic risk, which means it affects systems. It affects everything that you have learned in economics and everything that you will ever learn in economics. But it doesn't stop there. Because climate change affects our ecosystems, grassland, desert, marine, and our planet needs urgent action. Economic analysis is not sufficient to solve this magnitude of a problem. Finally, it's not all bad news. This is what one student is doing.
Hello everyone, my name is Erin Joyer and I'm a undergraduate at University of California, Irvine.
Okay.
California, Irvine. Today I'll be talking about my research. Today I'll be talking about my research project that involves carbon dioxide and the background of carbon dioxide and the background of motivation. I want to start by saying that carbon dioxide.
Hold on one second. There's a little feedback going on.
For the building block, the materials that we use. It is using the plastic gloves. It is using the plastic gloves and used to give sanitary surgery.
Maria, is that your mic?
Or even
Sorry.
the mattress.
What is it?
I was. Oh, there was
It's also
feedback going on, but I wasn't sure where it was coming from.
because it absorbs light and emits heat as a form of infrared energy. This is one of the primary reasons why it gets warmer and warmer every year. The data given on the right is the CO2 concentrations in parts per million every given year from the Mauna Loa Institute. This shows that the CO2 just continues to rise. The best solution for global warming is to limit our carbon footprint. However, this effort is no longer enough. A more energetically efficient method for carbon dioxide capture and concentration can be done using a molecule that can bind CO2 when used with electricity that can get reduced, and release CO2 with electricity and get oxidized. When the molecular redox carrier is reduced, it has a higher binding affinity to carbon dioxide and thus can selectively bind to carbon dioxide from a mixed stream like the air we have that is composed of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen. After the molecule is oxidized, carbon dioxide is released in a concentrated stream and nitrogen is regenerated and ready to repeat the process. This is a really good system because this is something that we hope to have in factories so we can recycle the carbon dioxide and use it into fuels, which is the project that I'm currently working on now. My current project works on trying out different amines and bubbling out carbon dioxide in it. I do that in this pretty neat thing. It's a glove box. It is a box where the atmosphere is very, very controlled. From there, I do the carbon capture and make this carbamate. And through the electrochemical conversion, I will make formate and amines. Formate is a very, very good chemical because it can be used into energy or fuel purposes. It's called a feedstock chemical, which can later on be used and transformed to other purposes.
Thanks very much, Professor Davis. Thanks. Now, I would like to apologize on behalf of Professor Morris for his conflict of schedule. And I did ask his permission to go through his presentation very quickly. So I will just go through very quickly a couple of his items here in his presentation. So just please bear with me. Okay, so this is Professor Morris' presentation, and it's related to inflation. And there is a very good argument here to be made at the end of this. And let me just go through it very quickly. And I know we're short on time, 1 hour, 3 presentations so far. So he is looking at the question of why are prices rising? Why do we have inflation coming in or not? And he looked at the CPI, and from the CPI, he looked at core inflation, which is inflation without food and energy. Now, one thing here which I would like to focus on is the PPI versus the CPI. So the PPI is a producer price index, and the CPI is the consumer side. And usually these two are related. You can see historically they moved in tandem. Now, the PPI is what producers pay, they face, and includes the input inflation, and it doesn't include the taxes. And it's a leading indicator, which means that every time the PPI goes up, we know that the CPI is going to follow suit. And this is what we're looking at right now. So the PPI is high and the CPI is just trying to catch up. And here is a question we always face. And if you have 2 economists, you have 3 opinions. And in this case, I think we have 5 economists, we might get 10 opinions. The question of the day is, do we think that this inflation here is transitory or is it going to stay? And we are kind of divided among economists, and that you will see today from today's presentation. I think Professor Morris' opinion is based on his research here and his presentation, which I am honored to go through, that this is a temporary, transitory inflation. So based on his opinion, so now if you ask me what he meant by this phrase, I do apologize, I'm not going to be able to, but his presentation I think is very interesting. And it's an excellent presentation, and that's why I'm just going through very quickly because of timing issue. So in his opinion, that it will be very short-lived. And this is the opinion, many economists has voiced that, including Treasury Secretary, Ms. Janet Yellen. She said that this is transitory. And this is what we're looking at. And then basically, many people think that by next year, the inflation will be going back. On the other side, I tend to agree with Professor Bertman, and that's just my opinion. And as I said at the beginning, you have two economists, you have 5 opinions. So I tend to agree with Professor Bertman that we might have some inflation that will stay with us in the near future. And that's very quickly on his presentation. And if you'd like to reach Professor Morris for details, please do. And I will go through the email and web pages for each presenter again at the end of the discussion. So thanks very much. Now, Professor Ray, if you can go through, Professor Ray, thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And I will share my screen very quickly. So today I will present 7 facts about the current situation in the US economy, and specifically I will focus on unemployment and inflation rate. So I will be quick in my presentation since we have time limits. So I will basically highlight only 7 facts that will present this pandemic impact on the labor, on the households and businesses. And specifically, like I said, I will focus on inflation rate and unemployment rate. So fact number 1, the US unemployment rate has been declining, but remains higher than pre-COVID levels. And as you can see, just one example, for instance, in September of this year, unemployment rate declined by 0.4% to 4.8%. The number of unemployed persons fell by 710,000 to 7.7 million people. So it's still 7.7 million people are unemployed. So, and this number, it's still higher than February 2020, previous year, with the unemployment rate of 3.5% and 5.7 people unemployed. So, and even we update to October. In October, the unemployment rate continue its steady decline, hitting 4.6%, but it's still 1.1% higher than pre-pandemic level. Fact number 2, the US unemployment rate for Blacks is still much, much higher than for whites. And again, I can bring many examples, just one example. For instance, in August of this year, the nationwide unemployment rate was 5.2%. White unemployment was 4.5% compared with the Black unemployment, which was 8.8%. So the rate for Black men was approximately 69% higher than the rate for the white. And even the labor force participation rate, for example, for Black women decreased from 61.2% in September to 60.9% in October of this year. Another example, for Black teenagers between age of 16 and 19, the unemployment rate actually increased from 15.57% in September to 16.1% in October of this year. Fact number 3, labor supply decline and job quits rate increased to 2.9%. This is the highest since December 2000. So again, just one example, in August 2021, this year, hiring of employees decreased to 6.3 million, and the quit rate increased to 2.9%, the highest since December 2000. So, and again, if you look statistics, in October this year, the number of unfilled jobs remained at 10.4 million jobs, unfilled jobs. Just think about. So in September, 4.4 million people quit their jobs, compared with August when you see 4.3 million. You can ask me why, reasons for labor shortage. I brought here, as you can see, 6 different reasons for labor shortage, but just to generalize this and make this quick, people are basically rethinking their work. People feel very comfortable that they can find a new job. Many workers may still be concerned about contracting COVID and anxious generally over the pandemic. Some have accumulated savings, allowing for more flexibility in returning to work so they can stay home. And you can see many other reasons too. Fact number 4, the labor force participation rate never fully recovered. So, and again, just a few examples. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, in September of this year, labor force participation rate was about 61.6%. And before the pandemic, in January 2019, the labor force participation was 63.2%. So millions and millions of unemployed workers stopped looking for work when a pandemic hit because of the reduced likelihood of finding employment, finding jobs in the pandemic itself. And the fact is, not all of them have returned. Instead, the labor force participation rate has been almost unchanged since last summer. And you can see this in these graphs. Fact number 5, the unemployment rate decreased significantly for those with a bachelor's degree and higher. Again, just one example. In August, as you remember, I already mentioned this, the unemployment rate nationwide was 5.2%. However, the unemployment rate was the lowest for those people who had bachelor's degree and higher, only 2.8%. So compared with the 5.2% nationwide and 2.8% for people with a bachelor's degree and higher. So the unemployment rate was highest for those than the high school diploma. It was 7.8%. Again, compared with the nationwide 5.2%. And you can see this in these charts. Fact number 6. Workers who switch jobs in September have the biggest income gains in 20 years. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, in September, job switchers saw their pay jump 5.4% compared with the previous year. This is like more than 3.4% in May of this year. So, and again, Americans are switching jobs for better pay, quitting to start their own businesses maybe, or continue to struggle with the childcare and school schedules. So it could be different reasons, but that's fact. Fact number 7, inflation. Inflation runs higher than expected. We already mentioned here in this panel several times about the inflation rate. I just will say again that in October, over the last 12 months, all items index increased to 6.2%. So it's the sharpest increase since August 1990. And when we calculate how we measure inflation, so we have a term what we call core inflation. In September, core inflation is still running close to the highest in 30 years. So what is the core inflation? The core inflation will exclude things like specific products such as food and energy. And even with exclusion of these categories, the core inflation in October was 4.6%. So it's increased compared even with the September when we had 4.4%. Wages at the same time, wages and salaries increased too, and they increased is in September by 4.2%, which was again a record gain. But the price level increased by 4.4%. So the high inflation is basically destroying the wage increase. And again, if we compare with the CPI index in October, which was 6.2%, and the wage increase was 4.9%. So the real wage decreased by 1.3% if you do simple math. What causes a rise in prices in this year? It could be several reasons. So I brought for you 5 reasons. It's gasoline, of course, gasoline prices, grocery prices, big drivers of inflation, supply chain disruptions, high demand and high aggregate demand higher than supply, low production due to pandemic or post-pandemic recovery, rising wages, increasing cost of production. But the fact that inflation impacts everyone currently, and and this study says, if your annual income of about 70,000, inflation has forced you to spend extra $175 a month on food, gas, and housing. And my conclusion in this presentation, I will try to make some predictions for the next year. We'll see. So I will see. I believe we will see more market volatility, changes in consumer behavior to avoid higher cost, and compounding domino effects of supply chain disruptions and product shortages and labor shortages. My prediction for inflation will stick with us at least until mid of the next year, 2022. We will see more housing prices growth and wage growth next year. And I can expect wage gains to continue next year. So this will increase cost of production and will drive prices up even higher, in my opinion. And if aggregate demand continues to be greater than aggregate supply for longer and by more than the government actually expects, it could cause stagflation, which characterizes higher and persistent inflation and slower economic growth. So that's it. That's my references. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Professor Ray. Now we have an open session for question answers. If you have a question, please unmute yourself, state your name, first and last name, and to whom the question is addressed. For every student, please click on the link you have in the chat room so you can register. We have at least 54 here, and at one point we had 64 participants. However, on the website, we only had 40 students who did, write their name and who's the instructor. So please go to the chat room, click on the link. I'm going to post it again right now, and then tell us which class you're in. And we're open for question answers. The whole point of this is we do this every year for dissemination of information, and we address current economic topics. So that's what can economics do, and what do you do in economics? And how do you bring economics to everyday life? And I would like to thank all of our presenters who have done, all of them, an excellent job. Again, I would like to apologize on behalf of Professor Morris. It's a conflict of schedule, and I'm sorry about this. Now, if you have any questions, please do. Thanks. Any questions?
Hi, I have a question. My name's Hunter Sonalski, and I'm in Professor Dancy's class. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so my question is, what do you think is a good hedge against inflation for the average American?
Who wants to take this one?
Anyone can, yeah.
All right, I'll chime in first. You know, we chat about this a little bit in our class in terms of you know, we talk about one of the podcasts that we did a study on in our macro class had to do with you know, talking about the yellow, not wasn't the podcast, it was just one of the story. We talked about the Wizard of Oz and following the yellow brick road. But one of the, you know, things that points to is assets. Assets, you know, will tend to go up with inflation. So there's a number of ways in which you can hedge your bets about inflation by investing in assets. And one of the, I think, most sound things that the average investor can do is to invest in a very broad-based mutual fund, such as an index 500 fund. And we chat about that in my macro class about that, you know, it's going to generally follow the economy. It's going to generally follow what's happening. And so if the assets of companies go up in value, so will the index 500 in a general sense. And so it you know, it can provide a good way to hedge against inflation, because it's going to be a very broad-based way of following that increase in the prices of assets.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Anyone has any other questions?
Hi, I'm Brooke Shingary from Stefan Dansky's class, and I was wondering, anybody can take this. It was just a question that came up. How much do you guys think the economy will grow in 2022?
Well, all right. Well, I'll start. I'll start it off. I know that some of the others, my compadres here, have their feelings about it. I think we're going to see a continuation of us coming out of this recession, and we've had some really strong growth. I think that we're going to continue to see that. I think we're going to see companies, you know, people going back to work. I think that we're going to see you know, production going up. What we see also is that people have there's been a reduction in debt from the pandemic. People didn't get to spend money as much. They retired some of their debt. As a result, people are spending money, and we're going to see people continue to spend money. And so we know that you know, there are two sides to how we calculate GDP, but you know, it's, you know, that, you know, circular model. It's either the production side or the consumption side. We're going to see a fair amount of personal consumption, so I think we're going to see the economy continue to grow.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Any other questions?
I have
I
a question.
Oh, we have to go at the same time, so
you go ahead. I'll go after you.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if there's combustion engines for cars and electric cars, and they both have
your
environmental
name, please.
repercussions.
Please state your name.
Oh, I'm Sienna Perez. I'm in Mr. Dancy's class. But yeah, with the two cars, I was wondering if there's a middle ground for like climate change wise.
Well, yeah, I know that Lee Bertman has been a big proponent of hybrid vehicles. And I know he has one right now, and he touts the great benefits environmentally that would provide. But the issue is, as I said, I don't think this is an issue of the environment. I think this is an issue of the manufacturers trying to be competitive in the future and trying to better manage a supply chain.
Okay. Noah,
My question's for and
please state your name. Please state your name.
my name's Noah Martyr. I'm in Professor Dansky's class. I had a question for I don't remember if it was Professor or Dr. Bertman. I believe it was Professor. I just wanted to make sure. But it was, do you think that the note, so the actual currency that we use currently, is the best and most effective way of, I guess, currency, or is there something better that we can either create that maybe you have a possibility, maybe a thought of, or do you think like the dollar is the most effective?
Well, I'd say right now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say right now, dollars either in paper form or in bank form are the best available for transactions. If you're thinking of cryptocurrencies, is that what you're thinking of?
Yes.
Very interesting. I think right now cryptocurrencies are more assets and more a little bit like gambling. So I understand newer ones come online. Some of them are up 500% or 200% or double or whatever. You're really in gambling there. This isn't for transactional use. If you have a small amount of money or some money that you can play with, that you're perfectly happy to lose, that might be fun to do. You might learn a great deal. But if you're looking at this to build a solid future, I hope you're really lucky, because a lot of it really will revolve around luck. I know millionaires have been made, but that's probably not something somebody would want to do when that person has maybe $500 or $1,000 that might be available to play with. If you have $100 to play with, enjoy it, but it's really something more of a learning experience than anything else. It's not transactional.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone questions?
I have a question.
Please.
My name's Roberto Ramirez. I'm a student for Dansky. I have a question for like how how we're switching to electric cars. How would oil companies like react to these changes, and like also for like the climate change part, when you said if we start going like completely all electric with solar panels and start like making changes, how because I know I was reading one of the parts from the points that said that the temperature will still go up, or like how will this affect with everything, like on climate, with with the batteries, because our batteries are not like recyclable, are they, right? Or can they be reusable?
Okay. Let me start off by saying the batteries can be recycled. The question is that we need to make sure that it does. That we have the processes in place, that we have the businesses in place. In other words, if you're looking for a business opportunity to get into, that's something that someone's going to consider about, maybe I want to get into the lithium recycling business. Because the lithium can be extracted from the batteries and reused. And so there's going to be a lot of jobs that are created, a lot of new businesses. The question is, who has the skills to work in them? Now, in terms of what's going to happen to the oil companies, let me break that up into a couple segments. For the majority of them, they're going to be dinosaurs. They are going to die. They are just going to slowly wither away over the next 20 years, that we're going to reach peak production of oil in, say, within the 10 years from now. And after that, we're just going to see one small oil company after another close up shop. They're not going to be able to attract the investment to punch more holes into the ground. As for the big players, the names that you're used to hearing, the Exxons, the Mobils, the Chevrons, those type of companies, they're going to pivot. They are already investing money in alternative forms of energy, and they will either make that pivot or they too will go bye-bye. So there's going to be this major transition in the energy business. One question would be, since we're going to build so many more power plants, like double the number of power plants that we now have, that could be a very attractive place for these businesses to pivot into. The question is whether they'll be able to catch up to those who already have the experience building power plants. That's a big unknown. Maria, I think you also had a question that had to do with the global warming side.
Yeah, with everything going to electric with solar panel and everything, it said how the temperatures will go up still a little bit, but not as high, like with all these changes, and throughout the whole years, is it like possible that, like, is it still gonna drop down, or even with all these changes, regardless, the temperature will still keep rising?
Well, the problem with carbon dioxide is it's already there. We already created the damage. It can no longer be corrected. So we can just try to maintain it. And the problem with the industries that we have right now, it's just like, why do 200 countries need to talk for 10 days for the climate change? It tells you, because if you look at the highest tax paying companies in the world, or you look at the highest tax paying companies in the US, these are the energy utilities companies. 80% of their profit will be wiped out. It's a transition. That's why it's very difficult, because these are the leaders. And they have all the capital. But we're leading there. That's why change is so difficult, because it starts from the bottom and it goes all the way to industries and infrastructure and everything else. Careers will change. Our lifestyle will change. It's not just a matter of changing our cars, but the roads will change. Our lifestyle, the food that we eat, everything will be affected. And we can only try to sustain 1.5, because 1.1 is already gone. It's done. We have damaged our environment.
And in a few years by now, how do you expect it to look like, with if everything goes, maintained, and nothing goes, we don't hope things get worse, but how do you think it will look for everything in a couple of years?
I wish there was a simple answer to that, but you see, climate change is systemic. It's like at the final 24 hours, India cannot actually agree with the language, which is instead of saying phase out coal, you see, the biggest carbon dioxide emitters are actually China and India right now. And India and China are just starting to industrialize. So it's really difficult for them. The US has been polluting the environment. Well, it has been the biggest emitter from so many years ago. Okay, and now it has actually dropped gradually because of our shift to energy self-sufficiency. But then again, it's not a simple question to answer. It's not a simple question.
If I might add something.
Yeah, please go ahead.
One thing that I find extremely frustrating in this discussion is whether the technology we're talking about could possibly accomplish the goals countries have signed up for. we're talking about green energy, we generally are talking about intermittent solar and wind power. We have no effective means of energy storage. Most of us believe when we flip the switch, the lights will go on. We are talking in the US about doubling power demands with green energy. This is really fantastical thinking because it would require enormous amounts of energy storage. I'm looking outside right now and it's beginning to get dark. When it gets dark, there's no solar power whatsoever. So what we face here is a gigantic technological challenge, not a political challenge, in my opinion. We should be spending money on developing technologies which can address the problem rather than talking about putting in wind and solar power, which with current technologies are completely unsuited to addressing this issue.
Yeah, let me chime in. Lee and I chat about the future of the energy scene in this country often, and I want to echo something that he just said, because as my students know, I came out of the energy business. I built a lot of power plants in this country, and I'll say that there are a couple key issues here. It's not just building the plants; it's also how do you get the power from the plant to where the customers are, and the need for new transmissions, new transmission lines. They are very expensive, and there's a lot of land use issues there as well. But Lee's point about, when the sun goes down, you're not making any solar power. When the wind doesn't blow, you're not making any wind power. And so if we're going to be using these forms of alternate energy to reduce greenhouse gases, I put together some prices that just talk about it, but I made the note to myself that said, batteries not included. It's like when you buy a toy, you got to go out and buy the batteries to power it. We can put all these power plants and solar, windmill and solar in, but we also then have to purchase and install all these batteries that will then allow us to have power when we need it, when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine. And they are not cheap. They're going to add about another, based upon some recent data, another 50% to the cost of building windmills and solar panels. And so when I look at the numbers, what we're talking about just to meet the needs of electric vehicles is somewhere in the range of about $1.8 trillion. That's going to tax our financial system. It's also going to create a lot of opportunities in the manufacturing of these batteries and in these windmills and these solar panels. It's going to create lots of opportunities, as someone else once said. Metals, certain metals like lithium, copper, silver, are going to become the new oil, that they are going to be in great demand. I know that in the conversations that Lee and I have had in the past, he's often said that, well, one of the ways that we can combat greenhouse gases, I'm sorry that my dogs are barking in the background, is nuclear. You do not get carbon dioxide or methane coming out of nuclear, but it also has its challenges, some of which are financial, in terms of their being very capital intensive. So it really is a very complex problem to get solved. But whenever you have complex problems, that means that there's great opportunities for people to have growing careers.
Okay. Any other questions? or anyone would like to add to that debate?
I had a question. My name is Delaney Dyer, and this is towards any one of you guys, but I know Professor Dansky kind of mentioned nuclear energy, but I just kind of wanted to know exactly why we don't switch to nuclear energy rather than solar and wind, which are highly dependent on changing weather.
Lee, you want to take this one?
You're the expert, but I'll say something. There's a perception of nuclear that's extremely dangerous. And it's not nearly as dangerous as others, but currently we have seen some issues. The latest one would be the problem in Japan. And I would say that the green lobby or the people that are green oriented tend to be very hostile to nuclear. So many nuclear plants are being shut down, even though they have a lot of life left in them. Having said that, the nuclear plants that are built onesies and onesies, in other words, each one is specially designed on its own, have become impossibly expensive. That's not what they did in France, where 70% of the power is nuclear. New technologies have come online, but the Federal Regulatory Commission that deals with nuclear power, the NRC, tends to have very, very difficult rules in experimenting and working on the new technologies, which are more oriented to small nuclear plants that could be mass produced, which I think is the answer to the problem. But there is such great hostility to nuclear because many people confuse nuclear power with nuclear bombs. Yeah, they both say nuclear, but that is not the same at all. So your question invites, I guess, something that probably Professor Dansky and I would agree, that in search of a problem, we need nuclear to be a big part of it. But right now, there's tremendous hostility toward nuclear, some of which is justified, but in my mind, most of which isn't. It leads me to one point. All the money we're spending on windmills and the rest of it, I think should be spent on developing technologies, because we do not have a technological solution to the current problem. In spite of what COP26 says, this is really, to me, sort of virtue signaling. They're big technological issues. Let's spend money on solving the issues, especially including nuclear. But energy storage is way up there as a major problem. And as Professor Dansky has pointed out, you literally would have to double transmission lines. You need transmission lines going to every single location where there's recharge, because that's an enormous power draw. So much of what we're doing is, let's pretend this would work. It won't work. And the demand, I think, or the effort, I think, ought to be spent on technological development. I don't see that happening, unfortunately.
Let me chime in and say that, and for the students in the audience that don't know me, I do have a degree in nuclear engineering. And so there's a side of me that can analyze, the issues that we're facing. And I agree with everything that Professor Bertman said, but I want to add one more. I think the biggest challenge that nuclear power faces is a financial one, because right now, how do you attract investment capital? Investors know that they can build a solar panel farm, they can build a wind farm, and they know that they're going with great confidence to get a return of a certain calculable return, because they know they can build it within a certain period of time. The uncertainties right now regarding what's it going to cost to build a nuclear power plant, how long is it going to take, right now are the unknowns are so great that it just makes it difficult to attract investment capital. And therefore, as Lee said, we need different technologies. If we are able to come up with some nuclear technologies that are much more modular so that people can build them quicker and not have to invest as much capital into them before they come online, it will go a long way to making it a more viable option. There's also the great side of it. It does factor in well as a complement to solar power, because solar power only happens during the day. What do you do at night? And one of the things is that you can run a nuclear power plant, which is a baseload power plant. So part of the answer is that you really do need a mix of technologies to really get us there. But again, it's going to happen. We're going to make this transition because the automakers want us to be buying electric cars. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of innovative entrepreneurial people who are jumping in to say, okay, how do we make this happen? And I think it was Socrates who said, at the intersection between your interests and the needs of the world, there is your occupation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more question.
Sure.
My name's Hunter Sanalski. I'm in Dancy's class. So I have a question for, I guess, Professor Davis, and it's why has government in this country gone away from being energy independent and I guess oil independent and rely so much from oil reserves in different countries like in the Middle East? Yeah. And also, would it fix the gas prices that have risen so much?
Well, again, our decisions and the policies that we actually make depend on a lot of variables in this country. And this is one of the reasons why it's difficult for us to really act according to correct priorities in terms of how we should go into this industry, how we should shift. To achieve growth, we have to move out from our existing paradigm. And technology, as everyone said, I agree, is one of the reasons that we can actually move out of this problematic condition that we have.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, or anyone would like to add to that?
Hello.
Yes.
My name is Giuliano Tuffanello. I'm in Professor Dansky's class. I have a question. Can AI use pattern simulation to predict GDP in the future?
Okay. The answer is yes. That the use of, for example, big data I want to make a comparison here to the weather. Big data allowed us to do a better job at forecasting weather patterns. You go back just a couple decades and it was, the accuracy of a weather forecast wasn't nearly as great as it is today. The more and more that we get into big data, the more and more that we're going to be able to use artificial intelligence to forecast anything in the future, including GDP and what's going on in the economy. But one of the things that's always been true is that we have no ability to predict where these shocks to the system are going to come from. But it could be an interesting question for someone much more versed in artificial intelligence than I am to be able to say, oh, yes, we can. Because maybe if you look at enough data of various political shocks that have happened, that maybe AI will be able, give us some forecasting of when that next political shock is going to happen. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch what happens with AI and to see all its applications. And I predict that we're going to be able to use it to predict GDP growth a lot more accurate than we do today.
Okay. With GDP forecasting, is it more of a tool that economists can use or politicians and corporations? So then, for example, if a corporation is making pollution and that pollution is affecting the area of the town and the workers that are from the town are not being as productive because of pollution, the AI technology can say, well, with this increase of pollution is making our workers unproductive, and so makes changes for the company.
I'm going to punt on that one. I'm going to actually say, Sam, I think you're pretty good at the econometrics.
Well, not as much as you, so I'll just follow you here.
Okay. I think it's going to be interesting to see how AI is used even in lawsuits, in trying to convince a jury of cause and effect. And so, yeah, maybe it could be used in the way you're talking about in terms of trying to determine pollution and its impact on workers. I think this is an area where we want young minds to open up their brains and go, what if? Hey, maybe there's something there I can do.
Thank you. With this idea I was thinking of, with the GDP forecasting, I think for a lot of economists, maybe we can actually create more ideas that are very small and detailed that actually can be a chain of events that can solve for pollution, work technology. If there's an advancement in the open market, or it's hard to describe this, if there's newer jobs and there's untapped resource for workers to even try, or even college students to apply for the job or create a company that actually improves the economy. That's what I believe, but I don't want to treat it as a wishful thinking. I just see as something that needs to be worked on to maybe give some ideas for a lot of academics.
There are a large number of companies that are in the AI space right now, and they are looking to find ways to apply AI. And so if someone pursues a degree in AI, there are already companies, lots of companies that would hire you to go pursue these type of questions.
I second that too. I think AI and economics have very good combination for the future as a career.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Vivian Castillo.
Hi, my name is Vic Castillo. Can you guys hear me good?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm from Doctor's Race class, and I have kind of like two questions that kind of correlate with each other, but it's just, will evolution of technology make most jobs obsolete? And the other one will be, will there be some kind of evolution in economy? Or is this right now like some type of a peak in the economy right now?
Oh, I got a good answer for you. And the answer is Steve Case was one of the co-founder of America Online. And I love a quote that he has. It says that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It ended because we found something better, bronze. The answer is that predictions are that within 20 years or so, 25 years, 1/2 of all jobs that will be jobs that you will get, 2 decades from now, don't even exist today. And so there is going to be this great evolution in what we do for a living. Think about all the times that when the automobile got invented, it did a major number on the people who bred horses and made saddles. Think of what when they created air conditioning, what it did to the people who used ice. That used to be a big industry, the ice making industry. All these things are just going to change the nature of jobs. The one thing I can tell you is that there's a exceedingly high likelihood that whatever job you think you're going to be going into, whatever career you think you're going to have, it's going to be different than you could possibly and wildly imagine.
Let me suggest looking at it a slightly different way. Think of skills, not jobs. What skills do you have? If you have analytical skills, if you have communication skills, if you have math skills, if you have skills in technology, skills in using your hands, these are adaptable to new jobs. So I think it's very helpful to think of developing skills, and you may think of going to a job, a specific job. That job might not exist in a year or two, but the skills are with you. So don't get too narrowly focused on a job. Look more toward what skills do I have that are more universal and more applicable.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I have a question. My name's Kayla Carroll. I'm from Mr. Dancy's class. This is kind of just like for anyone, but I was wondering, do you guys think that like as we advance technologically as like a society and we start to face more climate challenges and things like that, do you think the role of an economist is going to become like more closely entwined with other things, like how it's already, involved with climate and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what economists look at, what they probe into, it's an extremely broad range of topics. There are economists who look at energy issues. There are economists that look at specific industries like the wine industry. There's actually a group of economists that do that. There's a group of economists that look at social issues. There is such a wide range. And one reason why I love economics, because it could be applied to so many different things. And so it just lends itself with addressing all of the social and political and environmental and business issues that we face.
Thank you.
Thanks. And any other questions? Okay. Any questions?
Hello.
Yes. Please.
This is Ricardo Guzman for Mr. Sorry if I mispronounced this. Dr. Mikhail.
Hi. Okay. How can I help?
I got a question, sir. When do you believe the market is going to crash as far as the real estate market? I know it's a broad question. There's many different opinions, but in your opinion, when do you think it's going to crash?
Are you on that game, the portfolio game? That's why you're asking the question? No. You are asking the question because of that. Okay. So the background of this, we play a portfolio game in the class. And I think that's why he's asking. So the answer is, I have no clue. I wish I knew. If I know one is going to crash or one is going to go up, actually, I don't think it's going to crash. So I don't know why you say it's going to crash. I don't forecast that. But, no one will have a clue to this. Economists across years and years and years. I think the last one was maybe Roger Babson before the crash of 1929. So I am not going to play Roger Babson in this. No, I don't think that the economy, the stock market will not crash. I hope so, at least. But the brief answer to your question is, I have no clue. I wish I knew, though.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I got one more question for Professor Dansky.
Professor Dansky, yes.
Okay.
I'm actually looking and also getting into either nuclear engineering or civil engineering. What's the job outlook in that? Is it looking prospective?
Well, let me address the civil engineering first. It's a broader degree. And so civil engineers are able to use their skills. And I love the way Lee talked about skills. I really agree with that. Civil engineers are able to use their skills in a much broader range of areas. And so it allows you to have a little more, I'll say, less risk in your future career because, again, it's so applicable. Nuclear engineering is much more, put into one segment. So you're not going to apply those skills directly to, let's say, hydro power or solar power or something like that. But some of it will be transferable. I think the nuclear industry has a lot of questions in front of it right now as to whether it can solve its financial hurdles of attracting capital. I think whether it can solve its political hurdles of being accepted from perceptions of risk. And so those are all things that someone going into nuclear engineering has to consider. But I would also say, why stop there? Why not get an MBA to go with it? So that you have even more diverse skills in your, to your name.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Sam, your mic is off.
Yes, I was trying to. I tried a couple times. I'm sorry. Technical. I'm sorry. Anyone else has a question? Any questions? Okay. So at the end of this, I would like to thank everyone who was involved in this. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Erica Strobridge. Without her help and support, this would have not happened. I would like to thank everyone at the Student Center, including Ms. Rochelle and everyone. And I would like to thank every presenter, Professor Bertman, Professor Dansky, Professor Davis, and Professor Ray. So what I want from each one of you is please unmute yourself and join me in thanking them. Please unmute yourself and join me. Thank you very much. Thanks for all of them. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
You're
everyone.
welcome.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. And the moment that this, I will get a recording of this, I'll pass it on to everyone. Thanks very much for being here and hope to see you soon in other presentations. And I hope it was useful. Thanks very much. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.